Do you have a favorite story and a favorite painting that sort of, puts an accent to everything that you've mentioned? I know it's a very difficult question.
Yes, I do. I think I could teach everything that I've ever experienced with Edouard Manet's Olympia, which was painted in 1863 and was outrageous in its time. It was outrageous first because of how it was painted, and second because of what it showed. I don't know, do you know the painting?
Yes.
Yes.
I was literally reading about the whole history behind it and the submission in that galleries with it, and the press reaction to it and all that.
People got extremely irate about it, and there was a kind of almost hysterical response to the painting, which I find completely fascinating, that people could get so exorcised, about just a canvas, on a wall. And it begins to violate norms about representation, first of all, through how it's painted. So, it's very flat. There's very little modeling. People call the subject, first of all, is a white prostitute, an odalisque, reclining, and a servant who is a Black woman who is fully clothed. So a naked woman and a fully clothed woman is handing her a huge bunch of flowers, okay? And the flowers are right over her private parts, yes. Right? So there's really no doubt that these are an offering from a client or a would-be client, right? Mm-hmm. And that they're about sex for sale. Mm-hmm. And to kind of put this front and center, it's a big canvas,
yes,
6 feet across, like 2 meters across, right?
Yeah.
You could have no doubt that prostitution existed in the mid-19th century in France. And of course, prostitution was perceived as a huge problem, mm-hmm. and, signaling the death of morals and proper behavior, blah, blah. So first of all, you have a prostitute whom you can read from the picture as being working class. So prostitution during the 19th century was actually regulated. Mm-hmm. And if you were in a reputable brothel, that's an oxymoron, but within a reputable brothel, you were checked regularly so that one could be sure everything was sanitary, blah, blah, blah. But then there were streetwalkers. So the way Manet draws this prostitute and models her body makes it very clear that she's one of those. So already he's poking a finger at societal norms that are being violated, right? And then she has a servant, which only a courtesan, a high-class prostitute, would have, right? And it also happens to be a woman of color, right? So it brings in all the colonialist history of 19th century France. She's actually, we know who she is now after years of people researching her. People have gone a long way to crack this painting, if I might use that word. So she's a woman who emigrated, as did many people from the Caribbean. And her name is Laure. We don't know her last name. We know the name of the model, because Manet used Victorine Meurent again and again, including in Luncheon on the Grass, Déjeuner sur l'herbe, right? So the relationship between the two women is quite fascinating. People don't talk so much about that, but I was trained not only as a social historian of art, which means that I was trained to think about how works meant at the time they were produced, and to think about the socioeconomic climate in which they were made. And I also was trained in the very early 70s. I was an extremely early second wave feminist. My teacher was sort of the most famous feminist art historian, probably globally, a woman named Linda Nochlin.
Wow.
Who wrote a really interesting article that I'm going to tell you about.
Yes, please.
Called Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists?
Oh, that's such an interesting topic.
Now, she wrote that 50 years ago, and it's still like really packs a wallop because, you know, plus ça change, as the expression goes in France. The more change there is, the more things are the same as they always were, right? So that, I read that when I was 20. I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm an art historian. All of a sudden, I was in the picture in a different way. You know, I could find myself to be a creative woman in a way that I never had. And I think it's interesting that even though I was, you know, at a lovely university, I never thought about being a college professor until I met this particular woman. I never saw anybody like me. So I think, you know, we've gone from something like that, from gender to culture to race to class, to all sorts of, you know, the importance of seeing someone like you, right? So that's a digression, but I mean, that painting, Olympia, is about power. And I remember I was scheduled to teach it the day after George W. Bush was reelected. And I didn't have to say anything about his reelection.
Yeah.
Which was, of course, rather contested, right?
Yeah.
And all of those issues I could kind of unpack just talking about what that painting, how that painting was understood in 19th century France. So that you know, that's an interesting thing. I don't necessarily often have the chance to be confronted with a political event that has a lot of impact for my students, and then they come in the next day, you know.
Yeah.
And I have to do business as usual. And you know, you were saying that art history is often taught very conservatively before. And I actually think that it tends to be a conservative discipline.
Oh, okay.
Because it's so much about connoisseurship and value. You know? It's not necessarily about what the painting might mean at a given moment, or how that value is actually created. What does it mean? You know, and I think if you think about somebody like Rembrandt or Frida Kahlo or anyone now who might be very difficult to collect. You have to think about why that is, and that isn't always a historical question.